The fog that morning was thick enough to chew. It rolled in off the charwoil like a living thing, swallowing the spires of Oxford and muffling the city's heartbeat until even the punts sounded half-drowned. Alice Fairweather stood on the footbridge of Magdalen College, coat collar turned up, watching the river slide past in greasy silence. She had come for the light. Historians always chased light, but the light had vanished, and what remained was a gray so absolute it felt like the world had been erased and redrawn in pencil. She was 72, Oxford-born but London-raised after her parents' divorce, and she carried both cities in the way she walked, the clipped stride of Bloomsbury, the sideways glance of the High Street. Her walking stick, a polished blackthorn with a silver fox head, hung from her wrist like a talisman. She had taught medieval history, written 3 acclaimed books, and quietly amassed a £4.2 million property empire, but nothing had prepared her for the hush that settled over the river that morning. It was the kind of quiet that made you listen for footsteps that weren't there. Alice raised her phone. Through the screen the fog became architecture, swirling buttresses, dissolving arches. She snapped a photo. The shutter sound cracked the silence like a bone. Somewhere behind her a cyclist rang a bell, tinny and apologetic. She lowered the phone and saw them. Her 3 children stood 10 feet away, half obscured by the mist, as though the fog had coughed them up. Edmund, eldest, in a charcoal Paul Smith suit that cost more than most lecturers earned in a month. Beatrice, middle child, in a camel trench coat and oversized sunglasses despite the gloom. Rupert, youngest, in a Patagonia gilet and AirPods, scrolling something on his phone. In Edmund's gloved hand he held a single brass key, old and heavy, engraved with tiny letters, "Truth is the only inheritance." Alice felt the moment stretch, elastic and dangerous. She had taught Betrayal, Caesar and Brutus, Becket and Henry, but none had looked at her the way her children did, as if she were already a footnote. "Mourning," she said, "because English women say that even when the morning is trying to murder them." Edmund tilted his head. Voice like a BBC announcer soaked in entitlement. "You always photograph ghosts, Mother?" "Only the ones still breathing." A sound escaped Beatrice, half laugh, half sigh. She stepped closer. The key trembled between Edmund's fingers. Up close Alice saw the designer stubble on Rupert's jaw, the faint tremor in Beatrice's left hand that wasn't caffeine but calculation. They smelled of London rain and New York ambition. "We're late," Edmund said, but he didn't move. "For what?" "Clarity." He pressed the key into Alice's palm. The metal was cold, edges worn smooth by decades of handling. When she looked down, she saw the date scratched beneath the words, November 11, 1972. "Keep it. It's useless anyway." Then they walked away, swallowed by the fog before she could ask why. The key was heavier than it should have been. Alice turned it over. On the reverse, someone had etched a tiny symbol, a lighthouse. She told herself it was a prank. Oxford was full of performance artists with too much time and not enough therapy. But that night, in her manor house on the edge of the Cotswolds, Fairweather Hall, built 1782, inherited from an aunt she barely knew, the key refused to stay put. It rolled across her mahogany desk of its own accord, always pointing southwest, toward a coast Alice hadn't visited in 30 years. 2 days later she saw them again. She was in London, delivering a guest lecture at the British Museum on women and property in the Middle Ages. She had flown in on the train, bleary from marking essays, and was walking Great Russell Street at dawn when she spotted the camel trench coat. Beatrice, same posture, but now she stood beneath the awning of a closed cafe, arguing with a younger version of herself, 20 maybe, fresh-faced, eyes burning with the kind of certainty that only survives one viral post. The younger Beatrice's hand rested on the older one's elbow, pleading, not gentle. Alice lifted her phone out of habit. The camera clicked once, twice. The younger Beatrice looked up. Her eyes were the flat blue of a winter sky before snow. Alice lowered the phone. Edmund was staring at her too, and this time there was no BBC polish. He mouthed a single word she couldn't read. Then Rupert pulled them into a black cab and they were gone. She developed the photos that night in her darkroom at the manor. Yes, she still had one, hidden behind the library paneling. The prints showed something she hadn't seen with her naked eye, Edmund's lips forming her name. Alice. Clear as day. She told herself it was coincidence. She told herself a lot of things. The third time was in neither city. She had taken the train to Manchester for a symposium on digital humanities, her own work, a database called Luminaries, cataloging forgotten female scholars. The symposium was a disaster. The keynote speaker got drunk and tried to kiss her, the critics called her work sentimental taxonomy, and the coffee tasted like battery acid. She left early and walked until she found herself on the Bridgewater Canal, the water glittering like a jewelry box under the street lamps. They were there, leaning against the railing, coats unbuttoned despite the cold. The brass key was gone. In its place Edmund held a ledger, leather-bound, spine cracked. The pages were blank. "You're following us," Alice said. "Or you're following us." Edmund raised the ledger and showed her the cover. Embossed in gold, Fairweather Trust. "Look." He opened it. The pages filled with ink, her handwriting, but not her words. Dates, addresses, values. Properties she had bought in secret, a flat in Edinburgh, a bothy in the Highlands, a brownstone in Harlem. At the bottom of the first page, a single line, 1/12. Alice felt the bridge tilt. The canal boats bent like reeds. The sky folded in on itself. She fell, not far, just enough to bruise, and when she opened her eyes she was back in Oxford, on the Magdalen footbridge, fog thicker than ever. Her phone was gone. In its place hung the brass key, chain cutting into her wrist. The first entry was already inside the ledger. She pulled it out. It showed a lighthouse on the Cornish coast, but the beam swept inland, illuminating Fairweather Hall. In the corner, someone had written in red ink, 1/12. She understood then that the cities weren't cities anymore. They were chapters in a book her children had never read. And she was the only one who could turn the page. She spent the next week mapping the locks. London opened from the back of a black cab in Soho, but the cab was a horse-drawn carriage and the driver wore a tricorn hat. Edinburgh lived inside a lift in the Bodleian that only stopped at floor 1519. New York breathed through a manhole cover in Oxford's covered market, but the manhole led to a speakeasy where flappers danced to jazz that hadn't been written yet. Each place was a property waiting to be reclaimed, and each property was a key to the next. She navigated them with the brass key, watching the ledger fill with impossible truths, the bothy now a women's refuge, the Harlem brownstone a scholarship fund, the Edinburgh flat a safe house for abused academics. Her children were in every frame, always just out of reach. Sometimes they looked 40, sometimes 20, once teenagers with acne and ambition. They never spoke in the ledger, but the messages grew longer. February 12th, the key remembers what you forget. March 12th, they're coming for the manor. 4 out of 12, don't trust the banker with the clean boots. She learned Edmund's plan. She learned he had forged medical reports claiming early onset dementia. She learned Beatrice had hired a PR firm to spin the narrative, beloved historian succumbs to age. She learned Rupert had already listed the manor on a discreet auction site for £3.8 million. She learned that the intervention was scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m., complete with a luxury care village brochure and a doctor who owed Edmund a favor. Alice was the glitch. Her ledger, her life, captured truths that couldn't be edited. Every entry she made peeled back another layer of the lie. Her children wanted her silenced. She wanted them to finish the book. There were 12 properties on the list. She had unlocked 4. She found them again in a version of the Cotswolds where the manor was intact but the gardens were wild, roses choking the gravel paths. Edmund was pacing the terrace, phone to ear, voice clipped. Yes, Dr. Patel, 10 a.m. sharp. Bring the capacity assessment. We'll have her sign the power of attorney before lunch. Alice stepped from the fog. Morning. They froze. Beatrice dropped her latte. Rupert's AirPods fell into a flower bed. You're not supposed to be here, Edmund said. Neither are you. Alice held up the ledger. Page 5. The bothy. You sold it to a developer last year. Except you didn't. It's in trust for a women's refuge. Page 6. The Harlem Brownstone. You tried to flip it. It's a scholarship fund. Page 7. Enough. Beatrice's voice cracked. You're confused, Mother. You've been forgetting things. The doctor. The doctor you paid. Alice opened the ledger to a blank page. Ink bled across it, a photograph of Dr. Patel accepting an envelope from Edmund. Page 8. Rupert lunged for the ledger. Alice stepped back. The terrace dissolved into sand. She was in Cornwall. The lighthouse. The key burned in her hand. Shot May 12th, the lighthouse beam sweeping inland, illuminating the manor. In the window, teenage Alice waves goodbye to her aunt, inheriting the hall. She kept moving. Shot June 12th, Edmund in a boardroom in Canary Wharf, signing contracts with ink that screams when it dries. Shot July 12th, Beatrice in a Manhattan penthouse, filming a vlog, My Mother's Legacy, How I'm Saving It. She began to understand the rules. The properties weren't random, they were lessons. Her children's greed had built this labyrinth. Every key she turned was an exorcism. She found Edmund in a version of Oxford where the colleges were upside down, spires clawing at the sky. He hadn't aged a day since the footbridge. He wore the Paul Smith suit like armor. You're persistent, he said. His voice was smooth, public school, the kind that sold subprime mortgages to widows. Most people give up after the third lot. I'm not most people. No. You're the anomaly. Edmund gestured, and the upside-down colleges righted themselves. The Radcliffe camera became ordinary, almost. Walk with me. They walked. Students passed, earbuds in, oblivious. A porter argued with a pigeon. Edmund bought 2 coffees from a vendor who took payment in medieval groats. You're sick, he said. Not in the way you think. You're a paradox. Every time you remember, you forget something else. Names, dates, the combination to the safe. You're down to your last one. Which is? Us. Edmund bit into his scone. Crumbs crystallized on his lip. You think if you finish the ledger, you'll be free. You're wrong. The manor isn't a prison, it's life support. Without it, you unravel. Alice stopped walking. Why tell me? Because I'm tired. Edmund looked suddenly, achingly human. I've been keeping you alive for decades. I thought if I collected enough assets, I could build you a perfect one. A forever. But forever's a lie. You know that. Alice thought of the key, still warm in her pocket. She thought of the way Beatrice's hand had trembled. She thought of Rupert's AirPods and the roses. What happens if I stop? You go home. The Cotswolds, Oxford, whichever you prefer. The fog lifts. You wake up on the footbridge with your phone and a diagnosis. We grieve. The manor folds into itself and becomes a National Trust property. And if I finish? Edmund smiled, and it was the saddest thing Alice had ever seen. Then you lose everything. But you lose beautifully. He left her with the coffee and a choice. Shot 8/12, Beatrice in a Care Village brochure, smiling blankly. The caption, Luxury Living for the Discerning Senior. She found Beatrice in the final property. It wasn't the manor or the lighthouse or anywhere she recognized. It was a street she had dreamed as a child, suburban, English, laburnum trees dripping gold. The houses were all the same, red brick and green doors, but the windows showed different futures. Beatrice sat on the curb in front of a blue door, wearing jeans and a Smith's t-shirt. She looked 16. This is it, she said. The last lock. Alice sat beside her. The brass key was heavy in her hands. 4 entries left. I read the ledger, I know. They say I'm dying. You are. But not the way they think. Beatrice picked up a laburnum petal, twirled it by the stem. Death's not an end, Mother. It's a footnote. I've died 1,000 times in their minds. This time I get to choose the next chapter. And me? You get to decide if you want to write it with me. She looked at the key. The counter read 9 out of 12, but she hadn't turned the 8th lock. The labyrinth was lying again. Beatrice stood. There's something I need to show you. She led Alice through the blue door. Inside was her childhood bedroom, posters of Virginia Woolf, a model of the Radcliffe camera dangling from the ceiling, the smell of her aunt's lavender detergent. On the bed lay her first academic gown, moth-eaten. I thought I lost this. You did. This is the moment you decided to become a historian. Age 10. Your aunt gave you the gown for Christmas. You wore it while reading Bede. You took a picture of your father crying in the kitchen. He never knew. Alice picked up the gown. It was warm. Why show me this? Because every property is a theft. You take a moment and keep it forever. They taught me that. But you, Beatrice touched the frayed hem. You give it back. She took the brass key from Alice. Inserted it into a lock that wasn't there. The room dissolved. They were back on the curb. The laburnum was gone. Beatrice's hair was gray now, cut short. She looked like a woman who had lived every year she claimed. 3 left, she said. What happens at 12? We find out who we are when no one's watching. They walked. The suburban street gave way to a beach at twilight, waves the color of bruised plums. A pier stretched into the darkness, lights flickering like dying stars. At the end stood Edmund and Rupert, coats flapping in the wind. They held the ledger. It's time, Edmund called. Beatrice took Alice's hand. Her palm was calloused, a worker's hand. Whatever happens, don't let go. They walked the pier. The boards creaked under their weight. Halfway across, the lights went out. When they came back on, Edmund was closer, ledger extended. Last chance, he said. Walk away. All of you. Beatrice stepped forward. Give it to me. Edmund hesitated. Then he placed the ledger in her hand. The pages were blank. She didn't flinch. She turned to Alice. Turn the key. Of what? Us. Alice raised the brass key. Through the fog she saw them as they were, Edmund trembling, Rupert weeping, Beatrice caught between. She inserted the key into the air. Turned it. Shot 10/12. The 4 of them on the pier, but the pier is the Magdalen footbridge, fog rolling in. The ledger is in Beatrice's hand, pages filling with light. The pier vanished. They stood on the footbridge, dawn breaking over the Charwell. The fog was lifting. Big Ben chimed 6, from nowhere, everywhere. Rupert looked smaller now, Gillet rumpled. It's not enough, he said. You need 12. Alice shook her head. We have what we need. She took the key, pressed it into Beatrice's free hand. The metal cut. Blood welled, mixing with hers. 2 left, she whispered. 1 for you. 1 for me. Edmund lunged. Not at them, at the ledger. Alice swung it away. Edmund's fingers brushed the cover and the world stuttered. For a moment she saw every version of Edmund, the boy who loved her, the man who lost her, the monster who caged her. Then Edmund was gone, dissolved into the fog like ink in water. Beatrice was fading too. Her outline shimmered, translucent. Quickly, she said. Alice raised the key. Aimed it at her own reflection in the river. No, Beatrice said. At yourself. She turned the key. The river showed her reflection, but it wasn't her. It was every Alice she might have been, the Dawn who died in obscurity, the mother who stayed in London, the old woman in the Care village. They all looked back, waiting. She turned the key. Shot 11 to 12, Alice, infinite, holding a key that holds the world. The fog vanished. The sun rose, sudden and brutal. Beatrice was solid again, younger, the gray gone from her hair. She took the ledger from Alice's shaking hands. "One more," she said. She aimed the key at the sky. Turned it. Shot 12 to 12, a single brass key, floating in midair, suspended between Oxford and everywhere, between beginning and end. The key fell. Shattered on the bridge. The ledger pages spilled out, fluttering like gulls. Alice watched them rise, each one a door closing. Beatrice kissed her forehead. It was soft, almost shy. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For remembering." She stepped back. The footbridge dissolved, not into fog but into light. When it cleared, Alice stood alone. Her phone hung from her wrist, screen intact. In her pocket was the key, whole again. She walked to the railing. The Charwell flowed normally, students punting beneath the bridge. A tourist asked her to take their picture. She did, with her phone this time. The image was ordinary: spires, willows, a sky the color of Beatrice's old trench coat. That night she opened the ledger. There were only 11 entries. The 12th was blank, waiting. She pinned them to the wall of her study. The key went back in the mahogany box. It never moved again. Years later, when she was 80 and the properties had blurred into one long footnote, she would take the blank page to the footbridge at dawn. She would hold it up to the light and see them there, always just out of frame, waving. She never turned the 12th key. Some doors, she decided, were better left open. But this is only the beginning. The intervention happened anyway. At 10 a.m. on the appointed day, Dr. Patel arrived with his clipboard and his paid smile. Edmund, Beatrice, and Rupert were waiting in the Manor's drawing room, brochures spread like playing cards. The care village was called Serenity Meadows, which sounded like a euphemism for oblivion. Alice was not in her room. She was in the library, behind the false panel, watching on a baby monitor she had installed months ago. She wore her academic gown over jeans, hair pinned with a pencil. The brass key hung from her neck on a red ribbon. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Fairweather has been exhibiting signs of cognitive decline. Memory lapses, confusion about dates, repeated questions. Like asking what time it is 3 times in one morning?" Edmund supplied helpfully. "Exactly." Dr. Patel made a note. "We recommend immediate placement for her safety." Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "It's what's best for her." Rupert nodded, already calculating commission on the Manor sale. Alice stepped out from behind the panel. The gown swished like a judge's robe. "Morning," she said. They jumped. Dr. Patel dropped his clipboard. "You're not supposed to be here," Edmund stammered. "Neither are you." Alice held up the ledger. Page 1. The Manor. "You listed it for £3.8 million. Except you didn't. It's in trust for the Fairweather Scholarship Fund." Page 2. "Mother, you're confused," Beatrice interrupted. "You've been forgetting things." Alice opened the ledger to a blank page. Ink bled across it, a photograph of Beatrice's vlog, time-stamped yesterday. Page 9. "Saving my mother's legacy, one care home at a time." Rupert lunged for the ledger. Alice stepped back. The drawing room dissolved into sand. They were in the lighthouse. The children blinked. The fog was gone. Sunlight poured through the lantern room, illuminating dust motes like gold leaf. The ledger lay open on the floor. 11 pages filled. 1 blank. Edmund found his voice first. "This is kidnapping." "This is consequence," Alice said. She picked up the ledger. "You have 12 hours. 12 properties. 12 tasks. Complete them, and the Manor is yours, free and clear. Fail, and it all goes to the trust." And you get nothing. Beatrice laughed, high and brittle. You're senile. Alice turned the key in the air. The lighthouse door opened onto the Cotswolds. Task 1. The Bothy. It's been empty for a year. Make it habitable for the women's refuge. You have until sunset. She stepped through the door and vanished. The children were alone with the ledger, the key, and the ticking of the lighthouse clock.